the person that's doing the introduction of the speaker, Mark Long, our administrator for building codes.
Well, thank you. As Veronica indicated, for those who don't know me, my name is Mark Long. I've been at Building Codes for some 30 years now, and it's when Veronica called me and asked if I'd be willing to introduce Danny to our group as our speaker today, I didn't have to hesitate at all. To give you a little bit of background, Danny has worked in almost every administration since statehood. No, only going back. I didn't know about I didn't know about working with the TIA and Straub part. I worked with Straub to help create Wayne Morris Park many years ago, but I don't know if grade school counts. Does it? No. Okay. But I first met Danny probably in the Kulingoski administration, or what we call Kitzhaber II, because I think there was 4. Danny has had a variety of responsibilities, from chief legal counsel for governor to where I worked with him, kind of labor policy advisor, to a variety of areas. And he has probably forgotten more about state government than I have ever learned and continue to learn even these days. And I've appreciated his sage wisdom over the years, his always willingness to help and provide time, regardless of the issue. Today he's going to talk about our National Hispanic Heritage Month, and teasing him again, were you there in 1968 when Lyndon Johnson
I was around.
Get Congress? I'm just kidding.
I was around.
All kidding aside, and I can't take this as for mine, but Danny also reminded me that he's one of the few governor's policy advisors that has left more than one time, never made it to the port. Is that right?
Right, never made it to
the port of Portland, and still continues to serve. I saw him in the hallways of the Capitol this last session. He had an assignment working with the Legislative Commission on Indian Affairs. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And I've appreciated his help over the years. I know you'll appreciate the conversation today. He's got a great perspective, both on the issue we're going to be talking about today, but if you can ever get time with him and just pick his brain about state government and what it's like to serve Governor Cinch Goldschmidt, I suggest that you do that. He's always been very generous with his time. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Danny to DCBS, and thank you again.
Thank you. I was joking earlier that my colleagues who tended to leave the governor's office and went on to bigger and better jobs, after 4 tries, I really couldn't get it done yet, so I ended up at the law school. But it's really great to be here with you. I have to tell you that I'd like to weave in some stories about my experience and try to tie them into Hispanic Heritage Month as well. You'll notice that the intro slide includes a cover picture of the Nosotros book, which I have here as a prop. The Oregon Commission on Humanities has given us a case of these books, so if anybody's interested, and however long the supply lasts, we'll have these books available to you as well. It's the 25th anniversary of the release of this book, so it's dated, but I think it gives you a lot of history, a lot of background about Oregon and Latinos here. And I'll try to weave some of those things into my conversation. For me, the thing about getting introduced as a legal counsel, senior policy advisor, I also try to make some of my presentations hopefully somewhat lighthearted instead of just rambling on. And I'll let you know that when I was through Governor Kulingowski, I was given the title of Senior Policy Advisor. After 4 administrations, I made it to the Senior Policy Advisor level. And the governor and my friends also joked that the title of Senior Policy Advisor was more about my age than anything else. But my Latino friends had even better response to it. It says, no, they just mispronounced it. It's Senior Policy Advisor. So, but luckily we were able to move on from that. Let me give you a quick rundown. Here's just a real flash of what we're going to be talking about. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, and I understand that some people know people from the Imperial Valley. In Brawley, California, it's a desert community, but we'll talk a little bit about that. My work with migrant education, law school, certainly the 4 governors, and then my return to Willamette College of Law as an associate dean there before retiring. And in talking to Veronica, I mentioned that my work with the tribes as a legal counsel, governor's office, and then the Commission on Indian Services, I wanted to touch upon. I think it'll be pretty fast driven on the some tribal issues as well. So with that, and the other thing too, I hope if I do this right, we have plenty of time for questions and answers, and I think that's the best part for me, and also to let you talk about any of my experiences, careers, or ideas. So, where am I from? Brawley, California. I love the motto for the city, where it's Sunday every day. And El Centro is the next biggest community to us, about 14 miles away in the Imperial Valley. And its motto is, where the sun spends the winter. So you can tell the situation there. I have to tell you, though, that one thing about my family is my dad, who's the one that says elect over there, city council. He's an amazing story, as is my mom and brother. My dad was a farm worker who ended up getting sick, was sent to a tuberculosis center for treatment. While there, he took the vocational piece of it and learned to be a barber. He had an extreme hatred for drugs. And when he came back to be a barber, the local law enforcement asked him to be a narc, an undercover informant. And he did that. And then when it came out that he had to go to trial and testify, the law enforcement community offered him a job as a law enforcement officer, as an investigator, the first in the Brawley Police Force, and many things in the Imperial County, Latino to be a police member, went on to be a police chief, and then later city council and mayor. So that's my dad. My mom, who passed away in 1991, she was ahead of her time, a business person, a Latina business person, came from a family of industrialists in Mexico, born in LA. Her parents started to build a factory in LA, got divorced. One grandparent went back to Mexico. The other grandparent also went to Mexico, right across the border. But anyway, so she was ahead of her time. I will say that her idea of trying to get more engaged with friends, communities, all these types of things, didn't fit well with my dad's feelings about marriage, which is really unfortunate. I mean, I don't cast too many aspersions here, but my mom said, okay, she was going to go off and live on her own. So we were raised by my father, and my mom continued to do business enterprises there in the Imperial Valley. My brother, Johnny, older, just an outstanding individual, was destined to be the first in our family to get a college education, went to a community college, got his degree there, was set to transfer, like all his other classmates, to Cal Poly Pomona in California. The Vietnam War was going on at the time. My brother was doing well enough, should have got a deferment, didn't. His classmates, who I will say were white, upper middle class and above, all got deferments. So it's a statement of the times. But he ended up going to Vietnam and coming back. He never really picked up the studying. My dad often was disappointed about my brother not picking up higher education, because my dad was a real proponent of education. But my brother, of all of us, I would say is the happiest. 3 kids, retired from his career now, and doing very well. A little bit about Brawley. The dynamics of the valley is agriculture, ranching and agriculture. And there are those who have the resources to do that, and then others who are employed in those enterprises. Very lucrative business. But there were 2 sides of town, literally, at that stage when I was growing up. There's the railroad tracks, there's the east side and west side. The Mexican families, black families were on the east side, the white families were on the west side. But that's obviously changed in time, but that was the nature of the times we lived in there. Again, that's the Brawley situation we have there. I mentioned Cruz Reynoso at the very bottom there because he's unknown to you, But when I was a young man, my dad introduced me to this gentleman who was starting this new program in the Imperial Valley called the California Rural Legal Assistance Program, Farm Worker Legal Aid. And it was, I was interested in, I thought I was interested in the law, whatever that meant. But when my dad introduced me to Cruz Reynoso, I have to tell you that my first reaction was, they're Mexican lawyers. You know, I just hadn't seen one. And so it was great to know him, and I stay in touch with him now. He's a professor emeritus at Cal Davis from their law school there. So he was on the California Supreme Court, then led the United States Civil Rights Commission. But again, he was my introduction to this notion of being a lawyer. So this thing about field work, I have to tell you some things about that, but let me stick on with my high school education still. I told you a little bit about the East-West side. To tell you a little bit about the dynamics of that community, the high school homecoming court was escorted by the tri-captains of the football team. That took place until one of the tri-captains was black. The school board then changed it so that it would be the student body president, student body vice president, and the senior class president. My senior year, all three of us were Latino. The school board said no. So we worked with them to change it so that the court actually got to choose their escorts. And to their credit, they chose one African American, one Latino, and one white person. So that tells you a little bit about that community. I will also share with you that we all have our mentors. And I still remember very clearly Mrs. Presley, Janet Presley. We think back to mentors, people who inspired us. She always pushed me to say, do more. You can do more. Don't let the limitations of not only the community, but the high school itself keep you under wraps. You could do more. And then I get kind of tied up on this one, but she was also one that says, you know, you just don't let this issue, whatever you think of segregation that might be taking place. She said, you should take my daughter to a dance. And I thought, whoa, that would be a scene. So it was just fascinating to me that in these times of trials and tribulations, that there are people out there that are going to be right behind you all the way. And again, the whole community wasn't biased and discriminatory, but we ended up having to do that. And still about college, nobody talked to me about going to college. I was taking college prep courses, and you know, occasionally a professor or a teacher would say, well, why are you taking college prep? You know, and but it was all that framework. But you throw into that, as we were in our high school years, junior high and high school years, we ended up at my dad's direction, I guess, working in the fields. We certainly didn't need to do the work in the fields for economic survival for our family. Others did. Clearly, other families found themselves in that situation. But we did it for spare money, you know, spare change. But probably more importantly, it was the work ethic that my dad wanted to show us about it, that it's not undignified work. It's very dignified work, and certainly not unskilled. You know, everybody says, oh, anybody can go work in the fields. I can assure you that's not the case. But I also learned throughout that time just the wide range of a cultural thing about these workers wanting to do something that's good for their families, good for their kids. So it was a very dignified type of process. And I think lastly, and it worked, my dad wanted to convince me that we didn't want to do this the rest of our lives. So he thought education was the way out of that. So we did that. I was mentioning earlier that when we worked in the fields, we would start out in the Imperial Valley in June, but come July and August for sure, we would head up north to the San Joaquin Valley, because instead of working in the Imperial Valley at 150 and 120 degrees, we'd go work in the San Joaquin Valley where it's only 104. So it was a cool time for us. So, but whatever wherever we were at the time of our, actually Labor Day, we would be headed back to Brawley to start school because my parents were really convinced that that was the way to go. I did my community college there in Imperial Valley. I have to tell you that when I decided to transfer to this place called Southern Oregon College, in a place called Oregon, my mama told me in Spanish, she says, "Mijito, que no necesitas un pasaporte?" So she goes, my son, don't you need, my little son, don't you need a passport to go there? And I had to assure her that Oregon was still in the United States, and I became the first in my family to go on to college. Because I was the first, and I saw several people, the first generations when I went to Southern Oregon, I kind of can live up to the line of, well, what program did you do in college? And the response to that question has been lightheartedly, well, it's part of the NASA program. I took up space. So that was my, I did a little bit better than that. Southern Oregon did give me a bunch of opportunities, though, not just educationally, but again, tons of people there at the university helped me connect to the broader communities, including the Mexican-American community that was growing in Jackson County, Oregon. And that led me to doing some work with migrant education. We did a survey of Jackson County because they had experienced 1, 2, sometimes 3 Mexican children in the 5 school districts, major school districts in that area. And they felt, well, maybe there are more students out there, you know? So we did a survey, and within that summer right, of 1976, we found over 200 kids destined to go to school there who weren't going to go to school there because the schools were not welcoming. And they were going to wait to finish the harvest and go back to California before the kids started. So the federal program, Migrant Education, gave us a grant. We got started. And at the bright age of 24, I was the director of that migrant education program. So again, it was another great experience for me and a great job of helping migrant children. The vast majority of families were Spanish speaking. I have to tell you that my Spanish was great to use it again, but I'd lost the great use of it. And I had one evening in Medford, it was extremely hot, 100 and whatever. And we have parent meetings in the evening sometimes. And I saw this one mother who had come to several meetings before, and she was bringing her children with her. And this time I was excited because she had her husband with her. And I told her in Spanish, you know, because she was just fanning herself with the constant heat. I said, "Estás caliente?" And she looked at me, and the husband looked at me, and he started coming at me. And she put her arm out, and she said, "No, pero sí hace calor." What I had said to her, I says, "Are you hot sensually?" Yeah. You know, and she put her arm out. She told her husband, "No, but it is warm here, temperature warm." So I don't use my Spanish very often in the work I do. But also, this educational experience taught me a great deal about other case law that I, again, was just as an advocate for education, Brown versus the Board of Education. But there are other cases. Pilar v. Doe was a case where Texas School District was asking Mexican children to prove their citizenship. Not anybody else, just Mexican children, to prove their citizenship so they could continue to go to school. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court voted that that was illegal. You can't even, you know, unless you ask everybody, and even then, I think there was questions, you just can't identify a certain population and ask them about their citizenship. And it continues to be an issue for some districts across the country, but that was a big case. The other one was Lau. Lau was a San Francisco case that said there's nothing equal about teaching kids in English, no matter what your language background is. That's not an equal education. If you're unable to learn in the English language, you have to make some accommodation. And this led to bilingual education. And it was a furor for many, many years about the quality and the effectiveness of bilingual education. But I will tell you, words matter, because if you change that definition of what you're doing from bilingual education to dual language, then parents get excited about it. Their kid gets to learn a second language, you know. And so again, there's just the dynamics of working in an educational system. I point out on the right side there at the bottom, Jesse Jackson, who spoke at our migrant education conference. I put that up because not only is it involving migrant education, but he also had a saying that impressed me. He said that, asked about, oh, by the way, he was the first African American from Chicago to run for president. Not like that, the second guy. So, but he said about, when he was asked about taking risks, and wasn't he doomed to failure if he ran for president? And his words, and I think they're true for all kinds of risks and all kinds of occasions. He said, you're right. You know, if I do run for president, there's a chance I'll lose. If I don't run for president, I'm guaranteed to lose. So it was just an eye-opening experience for me. The other poem here that I put up here is one I've always cherished from my work in migrant education. It's basically this notion that we put our kids into schools with the hopes that they'll become harvests of hope. That's especially true for migrant education kids, to give them choices, not circumstances. So again, I've always endeared myself to this. I worked in Jackson County from 76 through 79, or up to 79. From 1979 through 1983, or midway through 83, I was a director at the statewide service center in Salem for the Department of Education. While I was there, I advocated for education in the legislature as a citizen lobbyist. And I also advocated for social justice matters. I got involved with a group called HPAC, the Hispanic Political Action Committee. We created it. It's no longer around, but we created and had a good go of it then. But it just got me more and more involved with matters there. And that literally led me to law school. Because at this stage, I was people were saying, you ought to do law. And I kept remembering Cruz Reynoso and others about what impacts that they were having, much more than just in the courtroom, but in the community. So I thought that would be a great opportunity for me. So I went to law school at Willamette. In all candor, it's a great school, but my choices were throughout Oregon, Washington, and California. I didn't want to move. So Willamette was a perfect place for me. I could continue my community involvement. But like all students, we look for justice. We look for ways of doing things. And I'll tell you this, law school and the courts and the justice system is not about what's fair, equitable, just. That's a viewpoint. What law school teaches you is what's legal. If you lose, I'm pretty sure you don't think it's the right thing. If you win, absolutely was the right thing. But it was this frame of mind that I had to get to. And we kept losing certain cases. And what I tell advocates about that, even now, if you keep losing in the courts, in the legal arguments, then your other option is change the law. That's a whole different process. But again, that's what law school did. And analysis skills, learning both sides of an argument was tremendous asset for me as I went on to work as a policy advisor. You just don't go with the position you're advocating. You have to know the opposing side. So that was a great thing. I worked at Legal Aid. Then and now, we served such a small portion of the eligible clients, but I worked at Legal Aid during law school. It's about 15% of the eligible people that we get to serve. Language came up there too. People found out I spoke Spanish. They said, well, that's great, but we don't have any Spanish-speaking clients. As soon as they found out, we had people lined up trying to figure out what to do. Not all the cases were legal aid cases, but there was an interest in saying, well, there's a Spanish-speaking lawyer somewhere. So that was a great experience as well. Continued my citizen lobbying. And then that led to the passage in 1987 and working with a gentleman named Rocky Barria, who got elected in 1986 to the legislature, the first Latino elected to the Oregon legislature. There had been others appointed, but had not succeeded in keeping their seats. So Rocky and I and a couple of others worked on this bill, House Bill 2315 in 1987, that would prohibit local and state law enforcement from enforcing federal immigration law. We had an incident in Independence where police officers had pulled a citizen aside, detained him, who was a U.S. citizen, Mexican, Spanish-speaking, but he was in the community having lunch, and they detained him there. Sued, nothing really came of that, but the law change prohibited state and local law enforcement from enforcing federal immigration law. We joked about this, but it was more true than not. The violation was driving while Hispanic. So people would just pull you over and ask you for your papers. So that law changed. People later on, including the ballot measure 105 and just last year, 2018, said, well, it's a sanctuary law, that you're giving illegals sanctuary. Having gone through the process of passing this law and having seen it implemented with law enforcement entities, it's not about providing illegals any sanctuary. It's about not profiling. It's about not using state and local resources to do federal work. It's about protecting people's civil rights. So in 2018, ballot measure 105 was defeated. 67% of the people opposed it, so the law stays in place. So again, I'm aware of politics, and I know that it leads to all kinds of ways you can spin it. I should go back. Third World Student Organization, that was the name of our student group. You know, you can believe it, in the mid-'80s, Third World Student Organization, that was the minority group. It was just, it's changed now, but it was just kind of interesting even at that time. I'll walk through the governors now. Let me just tell you about Neil Goldschmidt. There's, first and foremost, you know, I think we all recognize the atrocious crimes he committed before he was governor, but nonetheless, atrocious crimes. But again, he's the one that gave me my first opportunity at the governor's office. But I have to tell you something else about one of his campaign things I came to know of. He was out on a campaign trail in Eastern Oregon, and somebody came up to him, a farmer, came up to him and said, you got my vote. There's no way I'm voting for a goddamn woman. He was running against Norma Paulus. And Neil's response was, wow, I bet you'd never vote for a goddamn Jew, would you? He goes, no way, I would never vote for a goddamn Jew. And Neil says, well, I don't know who you're going to vote for. So anyway, my introduction to the governor's office was more about networking again. Representative Barria suggested I be interviewed for a citizen representative's position. I make no qualms about it. They were looking for a Hispanic to be on the staff. I fit the bill. So I did citizen representatives work and enjoyed it tremendously. I learned so much about state agencies. Who can tell me who regulates gas pumps as to how much, whether you actually get a gallon? Weights and Measures, Department of Agriculture. So I didn't know. But I also got to learn about state and local governments, federal government. So it was a great learning experience for me. The aftermath of 1986 immigration reform was that we had a legalization provision in that federal law. There was so much confusion, not just here, but in Mexico, about what that meant. So suddenly we had an influx of thousands upon thousands of migrant workers in the dead of winter. So the governor asked me, the chief of staff asked me to work on farm worker issues. I said, no thanks. I've had that background. I don't want to be pigeonholed. And then the next morning I get a call from the governor saying, you're my guy. I need you over here at 1 o'clock. And he said, the Department of Agriculture has a space for you. Of course, what are you going to tell the sitting governor? I did have to ask him, though, where is the Department of Agriculture? Because I had no idea. But anyway, so I did that work, It was trying to meet the needs of the industry to get workers, at the same time trying to enhance the protections for farm workers as well. So it was a nice balance. It can be done. You don't have to pit one against the other. And then the other thing that's left in this photograph is interns. Those who know me, I have tons of interns. I think it's an obligation for us to teach the next generation about some of the things we do, and interns were a great part of that. Governor Goldschmidt appointed me to the Board of Parole before he left office, and it was a great honor. People say, well, that's a terrible job. It is, in some sense, stressful, but it's a privilege to have somebody say, well, we think you can do it. You're the person to do it. Governor Roberts, I had a great time with her in the sense that she was the first woman governor, and hopefully a quick story here, campaign. She was asked, 3 people were in their campaign, David Frohnmeyer, Governor Roberts, and a third-party candidate, Al Mobley. They were asked in an interview, closing question, if you couldn't vote for yourself, who would you vote for? Frohnmeyer went first. Bad question, terrible, I'll vote for myself. Al Mobley. Well, I couldn't vote for either one of these people. I vote for myself. And Barbara just stepped up to the microphone. Well, I thought the question was if we couldn't vote for ourselves, who would we vote for? I would vote for Dave Frohnmeyer. And just the House came down on that question. It was asked again at a following debate. And basically the same thing happened. So she scored a lot of points with Oregonians and ultimately won with less than a majority of the votes, but nonetheless enough to win. So she made me the chair of the Board of Parole, which was a great honor. I think she ended up appointing me for the legal counsel position for a number of reasons, but one of the things I did at a city club speech under her administration was talking about crime and prisons, parole board. And my observation was, look, folks, if we can invest in our kids, we can certainly cut short this longer-term problems we may be having. And it just comes down to whether you want to pay now or you want to pay later, because I know on our end of it, it was very expensive. And due to ballot measure 5, we were cutting down what we were doing for school. So it was something we tried to deal with. Governor Roberts and all governors try to, in their judicial appointments, is one of their legacies that governors have. You go out of office, but all the judges you appoint are still there, hopefully doing good things. But she also wanted to make sure that the bench reflect the communities that they were in. So she tried to work very hard on that, took a lot of criticism for always appointing women, always appointing minorities. And if you look at it, it was nowhere close to that case, but did try to get more reflective of the communities. I also, as a legal counsel, I was approached one time when one of the candidates was Hispanic here in Marion County. And I remember a leader of the local bar, the legal association here, called me up and told me I should recuse myself. And I said, why would I recuse myself? He said, well, one of the candidates is Hispanic. And I said, I'm sure you make that comment every time the previous legal counsel, a white male, that he should recuse himself every time a white male was a candidate. And he said, no, that's totally different. But anyway, it was just at the highest levels of the governor's office, we were still getting these types of comments. So I was still getting these types of comments, and clearly Governor Roberts backed me up, and we were able to move on. I put Indian gaming there because Governor Roberts ended up being the first governor to actually do contracts with the tribes. We got all 9 tribes compacts to start gaming in the state of Oregon. And I also put it there because it brought upon one Oregon State Supreme Court case and one national U.S. Supreme Court case. The Oregon Supreme Court case was on the Constitution of Oregon, which prohibits casinos and slot machines. We argued that they're not casinos, they're Indian gaming facilities, and they're not slot machines, they're video lottery terminals, because there's no coin drop. We prevailed in the Oregon Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court case was that the Siletz wanted to build a facility here in Salem. By the governor's rules, the state rules, you could only have one casino and it had to be on reservation. So the Salem site would be off reservation. We prevailed in the U.S. Supreme Court. Lastly, in Governor Roberts, I wanted to point out clemency. This is a nightmare for me to recall because it was a nightmare for her. At the end of any governor's tenure, you can expect, in most cases, applications for clemency for death row people. She weighed this time and time again, whether to grant those requests. Ultimately decided that she would not. The people had voted to do that. My personal observation from the years that have passed, she regrets that. At least not given it better consideration. But again, it's a heavy load when you're suddenly at your signature, you can make those kinds of changes. But there's politics and everything else involved. But from a humanitarian standpoint, I think it weighed heavily on her. Governor Kitzhaber, what can I tell you? I was hired, I was the only policy advisor kept because there was a big division between Governor Roberts and Governor Kitzhaber, to say the least. It still goes on. But the chief of staff for Governor Kitzhaber and I had worked in Governor Goldschmidt's administration. So he asked me to stay on. So I was the only policy advisor to do that. I put hiring and great vacation because I was done. I mean, I figured I was done after Governor Roberts. I was going to go off and travel. And so I helped out with transition. And then very kindly, Governor Kitzhaber said, no, look, take off. You just call us at the beginning of every month and let us know where you are. And we'll have a job waiting for you when you get back. So I left with nothing to do and with a job in hand when I got back. So it was that was probably my greatest vacation. Government to government was set up by Governor Kitzhaber with the 9 Oregon tribes. It was passed, codified into law on Senate Bill 770 in 2001, the first state in the nation to codify such a government to government relationship with tribes. I put down judicial appointments because of a favorite line that Governor Kitzhaber had with candidates, and that was, I don't want candidates that hide behind the robe. He wants candidates that get out to their communities. And then big pride of mine, ballot measure 11 also had a huge impact on the state in prison building. One of my biggest successes, I guess, is to have the first sitting governor go to Mexico on a trade mission. And we got to meet with Vicente Fox there. The thing there was that President Bush had just gotten elected, and he was going to be there 5 days after we were. So we had the thrill, and I mean this, of being the dummies, practice dummies for the Mexican Federales, because they escorted us around the city of Mexico City, and it was just, I've never cut through Mexico City traffic so greatly. Sadly, another part of the administration was executions. Then candidate Kitzhaber said that he would abide by the law that Oregonians passed. So we had 2 executions, longest nights for everybody, including the governor. Clearly, he changed in his next campaign how he thought about that. And so again, he didn't exercise clemency either on his exit.
Andy, were you in a general counsel role?
For Kitzhaber, I was, yes. Then Governor Kulongowski, Cameron and I had the great pleasure of working with him. He's the only governor that comes with legislative, judicial, and executive branch experience. I put PERS reform because it was a big deal, but also talks about the politics of reform. Governor Kulongowski was known as a labor leader, labor lover, labor this, labor that, but there was a big price to pay for having pushed those reforms through. I mean, politically, but of course he survived them and did that. I would also share that I say it was an extreme honor to be asked by the governor to help him out with the funeral services that he attended. A lot of people thought this was political, social, or some kind of agenda other than what it really was. And that was that Governor Kulongoski is a former Marine. Not just that, but his respect wanted to not just honor these soldiers, Marines, and Airmen, Navy, but he wanted to do what he could for those families, their friends, and those communities. So he had me work on some logistical things. And a real quick thing there is I was struck by, again, the beauty of our state, its differences across the state. I cite one example, and it's not to demean Portland or to emphasize Eastern Oregon, but when we had services in Portland, very respectful. We had long lines on his motorcade, and people would stop and signal lights and everything else and let the motorcade go through. But my personal observation was that they were probably saying, oh, let's get this motorcade out of the way. We got places to go. And fine, but they're very respectful. Eastern Oregon, I remember a soldier in Madras. We took him from the fairgrounds to his burial site. And all along that path, people pulled over and got out of their cars and stopped. So again, just not different values, but just different ways of paying respects. It was just so vivid to me, that memory. The other thing about National Guard troops is that we had another meeting. I had a meeting with President Fox. This is at a time when the federal administration was saying, let's send troops to Mexico, at the Mexican border to enforce immigration law. And I remember the one line that I so appreciated in his presentation to President Fox was, the only time we send troops to the border is when there's an enemy on the other side. Mexico is not our enemy. So again, I'll close with the driver's license issue here because it's my biggest defeat in my history with the governor's office. It's my biggest defeat. We worked on a solution to give people, undocumented, people without legal residence, an opportunity to get a driver's license. Federal law, the Real ID law, said you had to have all these citizenship or legal residency. So we came up with, in 2007, with an option of saying the Oregon Plus. If you want to get the federal ID, you get the Oregon Plus. If you just want to get a regular license, you get the Oregon driver's license. Advocates for the immigrant community said too much of a stigma on our people, and we never got it. So it came back in 2014, it passed the legislature, it was recalled in 2015 by a huge 2-to-1 majority, and it's just passed again this session. So I'll close with my time at the College of Law. I went back to the administration at the Willamette and served as associate dean. Tons of new experiences there, much more diverse student organizations, students, and specialty bars. And one thing about it is I try to tell students and young people or whoever wants to come to Oregon, people say, well, why don't you go back to California? And I think that's a legitimate question when, about opportunities. I can assure you this, I would have never served 4 governors in California. I doubt I would have ever served 1 governor in California. My statement is, in Oregon, you can be a pretty good sized fish in a small pond. In California, you're a minnow in a large ocean. So I try to tell students to take advantage of the situation there. What we did as part of our efforts to get back to our communities, not unto ourselves alone are we born. We've had the Daniel Santos Diversity Speaker Series, bringing people, the 5 women of the Oregon Supreme Court. Rocky Berea came back and spoke about the bill that he passed about licenses, or sanctuary bill, I guess you would call it. And then, again, more of the Diversity Speaker Series, Governor Brown and Governor Roberts came and spoke. And we have a scholarship in my honor there that my classmates put together. So I'm going to stop there. I haven't even touched on the tribes, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Otherwise, I'll run through a set of slides on tribes. So, any questions so far?
Yes. What was your most memorable experience with all of your work, and and you may have already answered the second part. What was the most disappointing?
Yeah, the most disappointing was the licenses. I think the other disappointing thing was we've never captured a way to deal with prison populations. It is a reality. I mean, it's a political reality. It's a social reality. We're going to punish people. We call it the just desserts system, and not rehabilitation anymore. We're just desserts. So you pay for the crime you do, but it's tremendous cost. So I don't think we've ever got our hands around that one. So that's disappointing. It wasn't my bailiwick per se, but it was a part of that. But from the positive side, I took great pride in going to Mexico City and visiting President Fox. Nothing else is check a box for been there, done that. Los Pinos, the White House in Mexico, and it was great to do that. And as difficult as it may seem or may sound, serving the governor on those funerals was a huge honor to try to do that for the benefits of the families. It's kind of hard to grasp, but I was very honored that the governor asked me to do that. So.
Who was your favorite governor?
Well, that's a constant question when you're serving in the governor's office, and of course the answer always is this one. But you know, for me, purely friends. Barbara and I still get together. We chat. We go to dinner. We go to plays. It's a friend. She's a tremendous friend to have when she comes and speaks at your school and other things. But she's probably the one I've stayed closest to, and probably had the least political success of the four governors I had. Not because of her. I obviously she's the leader, but I think administratively we had some real challenges to gatekeeping her that just kept her away from doing what she does best, and that's being with Oregonians. But she was my best friend right now, so yes.
It's a little bit off topic, but do you have any thoughts about what we can do to minimize the growing gap between rural and urban Oregon, culturally and socially?
Yeah, the question is there anything we can do to help mend the urban-rural divide that's taking place? To that point, if you look at the map on certain elections, I mean, if you just look at the map, red and blue, the vast majority of Oregon is just red. You know, I mean, it's just, you just get startled. Whoa, the blue couldn't have won, you know, but it's there. So that's just one aspect of it. But economically, there's differences. So to your question, I don't think there's any substitute from dialogue. I really don't. I mean, you have to be out there. The Oregon Supreme Court and the Oregon Court of Appeals go out and hold cases in high schools. And I am stunned by the return, you know, from those trips, what justices learned from their trips out there. Like, did you know? Yes, it's an agricultural area, that kind of stuff. But again, it's an eye opener, and it's no easy answer. I mean, it's been in place forever. Economically, money talks. So economically, there's a thing at play there. But I think it's a constant convening of people who have an interest in improving not just their lot, I mean their region, but the lot of the state of Oregon. I do think Oregonians have a love affair with their state. I really do. We differ on our views about it, but I do think Oregonians have a love affair with their state. And my only suggestion, and I do this through the American Leadership Forum and other avenues, is just to set up dialogues between those communities on sometimes very controversial issues. Okay, yes.
So from a policy standpoint, what do you think are going to be some of the more challenging issues for Oregon?
The question is, from a policy standpoint, what's going to be some big issues in the coming years? I think that's why I retired. So No, I always think it's this this dichotomy of views: tax and spend, and we're wasting money. Again, much like the urban-rural divide, fiscal people have a tough issue there. It's always about, to me, it's about the challenges that education faces. I'm a board of trustee member for the Southern Oregon University board. Selfishly, I'll say we don't put enough money in higher ed. K-12 will tell you they definitely don't get enough money for K-12. Community colleges will tell you the same thing. Anyway, all that to say is that funding, financial structures are going to be a big challenge for Oregon. Always have been, and will continue to be, especially on the education side. Okay, let me do this in the last couple of minutes, because I put 10 slides together. The obvious, tribes have been here forever, long before United States, Oregon. But people keep saying, well, why should the federal government give them this status of sovereigns? Long before US, the French, English set up sovereignty with Indian allies. The Constitution, first and foremost, Article 1, there are tribes. It's not like they're given this situation. Again, our Oregon tribes. Executive Order 7. Anyway, two other aspects we're doing with Cultural Items Task Force, trying to have state agencies survey what they have in their possession. And the last thing I'll leave you with is Senate Bill 13 is going to be a revolutionary change in the United States, and I think, well, Oregon and the United States, is that we're requiring Oregon schools to teach Oregon tribal history. Because if you look at history books, if there's any reference, it's southeastern, midwestern, northeastern tribes. So anyway, so with that, once, twice, thank you so much. Don't forget that whoever wants one of these, there's a box full of them. So thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny, for coming and visiting and having the opportunity to talk and give us your story. Thank you, everybody, for attending our Lunch and Learn. And for next month, be looking for our email. It's going to be another one coming. Thank you, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, darling.